introduce my panel of artist mothers. If they would come up, actually if they come up as I introduce them, then you'll know which is which. That'd be great. Emily Popp is a fashion designer who recently received her MFA in textiles and fashion from UW-Madison. She primarily uses secondhand and found materials in her clothing, such as the 100-pound dress, a single garment created from over 100 pounds of discarded clothing. Her work also includes performance, costume design, illustration, and community-based projects. She is the mother of Leo, who is 3 years old. Rebecca Kautz is adjunct professor at Mount Mary University and holds an MFA in painting and drawing from UW-Madison. She was the ACAA's 2005 Outstanding New Professional and the 2017 Longlist winner of the Social Art Award from the Institute for Art and Innovation in Berlin, as well as the 2018 Publication Fellowship winner from Peripheral Vision Press. In addition to exhibitions and performances in the gallery setting, she conducts long-term durational performances on art, caregiving, and value, including Artist Working and the Shame Project. She is the mother of Jonah and Winifred, who are 12 and 4.
Six, Winnie.
Victoria Madoff holds an MFA from the San Francisco Art Institute. In 2010, she was awarded Honorable Mention from Planet Magazine and the Paul Sachs Award in Urban Landscape. She was the winner of the College Art Association Award in 2016, Specto Art Space in 2018, and the Midwestern Photographers Project in 2017. She was the Artist in Residence at Burren College of Art in Ireland in 2013 and was recently awarded a Community-Supported Artists Grant from the Arts and Literature Laboratory for 2019. She has one daughter, Priscilla, who is 3.5. And if she doesn't make it, it's probably Priscilla's fault. I'm kidding. Helen Lee is currently an associate professor and head of the Glass Lab at UW-Madison. She holds an MFA in glass from the Rhode Island School of Design and a BSAD from MIT. She was awarded the inaugural Erwin Borofsky Prize in Glass Art in 2013 and the Edna Vikers Arts in Wisconsin Award in 2014. Most recently, she received the Gold Award in the 2016 Bullseye Emerge exhibition. She has exhibited widely in the United States and her work is held in collections internationally. She is the mother of Cicada, who is 4. Bird Ross is a Madison-based studio artist working in textiles, mixed media, and mundane objects. She received her MFA from UW-Madison and was the winner of the Wisconsin Arts Board Artist Fellowship in 2001. In 2010, she was awarded the National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship and is a 3-time invitational artist at the Emma International Artist Collaborative event. Her work has been exhibited across the United States and internationally, and she has collaborated widely both nationally and internationally. Together with Brenda Baker, she co-founded the Women Artist Forward Fund and the ongoing exhibition, Women Being Forward. She is a mother of 3, aged 26, 24, and 21. Jill Sebastian is a professor emerita at Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design, the recipient of numerous Wisconsin Arts Board grants and fellowships. She received a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship in 1985 and the Sacagawea Award in Professional Dimensions in 1989. She was the City of Milwaukee Artist of the Year in 1997 and in 2010 received the Woman of Influence Award from the Business Journal of Greater Milwaukee. In 2016, she was awarded the Wisconsin Visual Art Lifetime Achievement Award, and her sculpture, drawings, and installations have been exhibited across the United States and internationally, and she has collaborated widely with composers, writers, filmmakers, and dance companies. She is the mother of 2 grandchildren aged 36 and 39 who have both chosen artistic paths, and she assists in caring for her 2 young grandchildren aged 2.5 and 6 months. Please join me in welcoming our panel. Jill, I'd like to start with you. You mentioned in your artist statement that art reveals us to ourselves. In my experience, this is one of the ways that making art overlaps with raising children. Did you find that?
Yes, I'd say first, no one will ever know you as well as your children do. That's an absolute. I watch my 6-month-old granddaughter, and when her mother, my daughter, moves through the room, it doesn't matter how many other people are there, her eyes follow her. When I became pregnant, I had, as you described, my early work was angst and kind of self-reflective and so forth. And I realized I wasn't prepared at all to become a parent. It kind of came as a surprise, among other things. And my own childhood was problematic, so I couldn't look to my parents as a pattern to follow. I read The Absorbent Mind by Maria Montessori and had an epiphany, which was one of the important things, was to think about what kind of characteristics you wanted your children to have. And among those, I said to myself, I'd like them to be confident in themselves. I'd like them to find purpose and happiness in their lives. And when I said that, I realized it didn't describe me at all. And so, going back to that infant's eyes following their mother, I realized that it is, being a parent isn't faking it until you make it. It is right now and all the time, and that I needed to work on myself and to become that kind of person. You can't tell them from the sidelines, oh, I believe in you, if you don't believe in yourself. And so I have to admit that a number of times I was in therapy and so forth, and my children were honestly privy to all this development, that we really grew together. And my children grew up in my studio, and I didn't hide anything from them. And they also, the other pattern that I looked at was my Aunt Dorothy, who was a farm wife. And think about it, it was 1973 before a woman could inherit a farm in Wisconsin if her husband died. And yet 40% of all income from farms comes from women's labor. And so I saw her working the farm the summers when I visited her, and realized that making art is a lot like farming. You strap on the kid and you go out to the fields and you get the job done. And so that helped me considerably. And so in the way that, art is reflecting upon yourself, that it becomes bigger. It becomes a bigger self with your children. And my children, as they grew up, became some of my most trusted critics. They'd say things like, oh, Mom, that's a great drawing of a chicken, but can you cook it so we can eat it? And they were brutally honest with me. And so they're, they grew up in a loft in an industrial area, and when they became teenagers said, this is well enough good for you, but we like rooms with doors that close. And so this is by way of saying that, like a farm, a family is a site of work, and the work is being a family and, working together through the thick and thin of your successes and failures and your finances. And ultimately, I think what I realized that I wanted to give my kids, which I didn't experience from my parents, was just unconditional love. And that's what they give you, and that's what they know about you.
Go ahead and pass it, Gus.
What's it help?
I'd like to ask Rebecca this pointed question, and then I'd also like to hear from Bert on this. In what ways has having children heightened your creative output?
Heighten my creative output. Well, I will say that it took a lot of struggle. There was a paralysis that happened, I think, at first, and I don't know if anyone else can relate to that, but there's this, when you first become a mother, that sense of your new role and sort of who you are as a person and as an artist and what you're making. For me, it sort of came to a screeching halt. Nursing an infant, and learning how to mother and learning how to parent was, that transition took several years, I would say. And so, but when I kind of started to get my footing was sort of what you had said, Noël, in your essay, that your time becomes very finite. And so with that time, you recognize that you need to assert yourself. You need to make a plan, and it grounds you in a way so that you are, your mortality is sort of forced in your face. You're looking in this mirror and saying, okay, what have you done? Are you working toward what your goals are? And so that pressure, you're kind of in this pressure cooker where you kind of need to move forward and push forward. And that didn't happen until my second child came. So this has happened probably in the last 4 years for me, where I recognized that I had a lot to accomplish and that I had a voice or something that I really wanted to say. When I started back to graduate school. But for me, I think that children are absolutely fascinating. When you have children, you are looking at development and trying to explain things to a child. You have to look at the world in a new way in order to explain it to them. Everyday things become sort of fascinating. Everything you have to, your eyes are sort of fresh and new when you're looking at the world, when you're trying to explain it to a child. So that learning experience and that of trying to negotiate childhood and explain childhood and it sort of opens your eyes. So in that way, I would say that it really pushes you forward and propels you into making work. So those two reasons, but also you should see the way that my daughter, when she comes into my studio, she makes frequent, she's an artist herself, and so when she comes into my studio, it's incredible. And she's been coming into my studio since she was 1 year old. I mean, ever since she could walk, she would be coming into my studio, she would be in my space. I actually ran a home daycare and had several children in my home for 3 years while I was making work. And I had a child who scrawled all over one of the drawings that I was working on. And I was mortified that this drawing that was a drawing that I had made of Winifred from a photo I had taken of her, that he had scrawled all over it. I was so angry. And what's interesting is that now I just worked over it. I just incorporated it into the drawing and made it all work with the drawing. And now it's like one of my favorite pieces and it hangs in my dining room. And I just was like, why was I so uptight about this one drawing that, you know, that I should be excited that this child was learning from me and felt so compelled to sort of make a mark on my paper. And so Winnie has always been doing marks on my paper, and we sort of play back and forth with the marks on my paper, and that collaboration has become a real foundation of my practice in my studio. She often wanders into my studio wearing horse masks and clothes that are way too big, dressed as a cowboy. Sometimes she's wearing a unicorn horn or wearing crazy masks, and I actually don't even know who's coming into my room because my studio, because I can't recognize her. I don't know if it's her or Jonah. But that process and that sort of those interruptions have become welcome interruptions, and you just sort of, you kind of go with it, and you use the time that you have, and you are fruitful from it. So there's a lot of horse heads and things in my work now that I'm noticing coming up, these characters, and these characters are myself, they're my children, but also I wanted to say that she is so unself-conscious, I guess is that a word, unself-conscious? She's so unself-consciously will create in the studio. She comes in and she just starts throwing all these colors onto her palette and mixing them together and slapping them on the canvas and slapping them on the paper. She will make at a drop of a hat, and she is not so self-conscious to the point where she doesn't know what mark to make next. And it's that sort of energy and that kind of unashamed expression that I look to, and I'm like, man, she's mixing some great colors. Sometimes she'll share her paints that she's mixed with me, because they're these great colors that she's made, and so I'm using these great colors that she's made. And so I would say in that way that it's a different practice, it's a different way of working, but it's exciting.
I'd like to talk about the way that being a mother either does or does not become a subject in the work that we make. Helen, your work often deals with language, and I find it really interesting that although you usually make work about the maternal. There is one piece of maternal proverb that links your mother, yourself, and your child in a really poetic way by writing your mother's words in your own breast milk and then passing the words through a flame in order to reveal the text. Can you talk about what was going on differently either in your life or in your process that that one piece kind of stands out in that way?
Yeah, that piece happened in 2015. I had, the year I had my kid, I also had my first solo show in New York. And it came quickly on the heels of moving here and starting a new job running the Glass Lab here. And that also came quickly after helping my mother pass away and sort of settling up her estate. And she was my last parent to die. So from 2011 to 2015 was like a really intense like mashup of life experiences. And that piece came from an exhibition in which there were actually many works that actually addressed my cultural background and my family, both past and my newborn daughter. And I had never in the past addressed my cultural background in my own studio work, but the sort of circumstances I was in, I have like a much more violent metaphor for what it feels like in terms of time management when you have a child, which is like, it just felt like there was a gun to my head to get the work done. It was just so urgent. And so in that particular work though, it looks like a classical Chinese scroll and the words say everyone is sick. There's nothing particularly poignant about the phrase other than my mother said it when she was ill in a waiting room. And she just sort of, it wasn't like, she didn't mean for it to be something that I would hold on to. She was just sort of looking around and saw all these other people and just said, oh, everyone is sick. But she said it in Chinese. And when you say the phrase in Chinese, it just has a different emotional tone to it. It feels like there's a greater sense of camaraderie to it. And I held on to that phrase just as someone witnessing her experience. So that was something that I held on to 5 years ago. And one of the things that I think about when I'm prompted with this question is just how artwork comes together and how it's often drawing from life experiences from years ago or holding on to something you just can't let go of from even decades ago. And waiting until the right circumstances and timing come together, and oftentimes it might be a narrative or a phrase, or it might be a material or a process that sort of helps these things coalesce into a work. And I think all of us probably have more than a lifetime of ideas, and which ones actually come to fruition is a really interesting thing to look at. And I think my experience with motherhood really changed the circumstances of what rose to the top in that particular year as I approached that solo exhibition. And so that whole exhibition, there are many works that address my family, which I'd never done before. And I guess we were talking earlier about like how motherhood changes how you see yourself or something. And one of the things that all of these questions have brought up for me is that when I was mothered, I was raised by my grandmother who only spoke Chinese. So when I was mothered, it happened in a different language. And this shift, like it was just impossible not to address the cultural background in the work anymore. It wasn't an option. And it wasn't really an option to not be thinking about it as I was making a new life and sort of really like letting go of this huge part of my life, knowing that my partner is Caucasian and there was sort of none of that relationship to that language and that cultural background. What else did I have to say about that piece? Oh, yeah, and then for that piece in particular, I think something else that's worth thinking about is when I think about that particular piece and the practice of making art, I'm thinking about where did the message come from, who's delivering the message, and who's the message going to. And these are things that are really important sort of in our lives as artists and in our works themselves.
I wonder if anyone would be willing to talk about their willingness or not to openly discuss their children or the fact that they are a mother in the professional world.
Well, since I'm the oldest one up here, I'll start this off. Almost 40, well, it's not quite 40 years ago when I had my children, if you were an artist and you mother, and you mentioned that was kind of the death knell in the professional world. I remember I called up my gallery in New York and I said, I'm pregnant, and I fully expected to be dropped. And she said, that's great, you should have 7, that artists make the best parents. Thank goodness I didn't have 7. But anyway, she represented me for another 10 years, but she made it very clear is that she was cutting me no slack. You know, that gun to the head business, and it still exists. And but I would just make the distinction in, say, the art world, where you know, at that time, and even today, I think there's a residue of that, talking to younger women artists who are mothers. I hear that it still persists to some extent. But the other part of the professional world that I was involved in was teaching, and there was no way to hide the fact that I was a mother. And sometimes kids just had to show up at school, and that's just how it was, or I'd have to leave. And I can remember discussions among faculty. Most of the other faculty did not have children. There were artists that chose not to have children. And they resented the fact that our insurance plan included family plan because it didn't apply to them. And so why should I get something more than they got? I don't know what that thinking is exactly about. But my retort was, well, guess who's going to pay your Social Security when you're old? And, but I found, so in the art world, it just wasn't discussed. And I made several decisions in my teaching career based on being a mother, but I never made any decisions in my art and art career that were specifically for being a mother. And I think the biggest one was after I got divorced, that yes, my husband and I got divorced, but we didn't get divorced from the kids. And so whereas as a, you know, family unit, you can move other places, I moved 3 blocks away so that my kids could walk back and forth. And then I was locked into the teaching job that I had because he was going to be in Milwaukee, and that was it. And so no regrets whatsoever. But in my studio practice, geography can be inconvenient, but it's not a limitation for being a parent.
I was just thinking about when I did a post-baccalaureate at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago in fashion, and I remember, this was 4 years ago, 5 years ago, there would be like the question of, so what's next? You know, okay, let's work on our CVs and, you know, portfolios. And I never told my professors that my plan was to have a baby, like that was the next step. And I even remember I had an art history professor who had a kid, and I was like, hey, so how'd you do it? You know, kind of like, you can do this? And then also after I had my son, and I was communicating with some of my professors from there who had written letters of recommendation for me or something, one of them I told, because I was like, I knew she would be like, cool. But the other one, I just didn't even say anything. You know, I was like, thanks for the letter of recommendation, my life is great. Like, I chose not to say that because I thought subconsciously somehow that would be like, oh, well, now your career is, where's it gonna go now? So that is some sort of assumption that I had. I eventually did see her and told her I had a kid, and she was perfectly lovely about it, but, so that was holding on to it.
It's funny because I think that my answer, it's so interesting because here I am, you know, 61 years old, and I think my answers would be very different if I was 31 years old or 41 years old. And I love hearing the different ages up here. It's really, really, really interesting to me because, you know, when you're 30 and you have your kids, you have these, you know, some thoughts. And then when you're 40, and then when they get older and you get older, it just, you know, it just really sort of moves along. So it's interesting to hear, you know, that, oh yeah, I was there, oh yeah. But I'm not, you know, not really there anymore. But so to answer the question, I think that, for me, you know, you can't not, if you have children, even if you want to also have a career as an artist, it's not like you can pretend or fathom or fashion that they're not there, or they might not get in the way, or, you know, they're more than the elephant in the room, man, they are. And so, it seems to me that over time, yes, I did, you know, resent being a mom when my kids were really little, and I was resenting not being able to, you know, maintain or focus on my work or whatever it was. I mean, I resented it because I didn't get it. You know, I mean, it's sort of, I think I wrote this to you, Noël, that it's like, you know, oh, guess what? You get to be a guide and take people down the Amazon, and you don't speak Spanish, and you don't know how to do anything with a boat, and you don't know anything about the weather or how to swim or, you know, anything. And it's sort of like, there's so much you don't know. And it's really hard, I think, when you're in your 30s, which I was when my kids were born, to say, oh, there's some things I don't know. And this is going to be hard, and I'm not going to like it. You know, I think I was probably fighting myself more than anything else, that it was so much about, you know, how am I going to get what I want out of this? And I have to say that yes, it had an impact on my work, of course. But, you know, growing older and living in Wisconsin and, you know, being a white female and being, you know, 30 and then 40 and then 50 and then 60 years old, you know, you can't really compartmentalize. I think finally I'm sort of figuring these things out, and it's all part of a piece, and I'm grateful for every single piece. Even though I don't always feel grateful, and I don't always sound grateful for every piece, but I am, because I think all those little pieces, all those fragments are what make me whole, and I'm so grateful for that. So yeah, I think it was hard to teach and bring my kids along. You know, when I was teaching a workshop somewhere, or bringing them into the classroom, or not, or choosing, or trying to figure out what to do, and all of that, and yet I'm. You know, those were all lessons for me, as my kids were lessons for me, all of those things that I needed to do and learn to do, or didn't learn how to do, or really, you know, got a really great handle on, whatever it was all a part of the piece.
Can I say something? Yeah.
I just wanted to add that, well, the piece that you saw from the start was the piece the video that I made about my frustration with some of the cultural notions of what motherhood brings, and also some of the angst about negotiating my role as a daughter and my relationship with my mother, and sort of reconciling this sort of poor relationship that I had with my mother, and now trying to not relive the sort of poor relationship that my mother had with me, and this sort of psychodrama, this family psychodrama that happens. And so that's, a lot of the work that I make has a lot to do with that sort of family psychodrama, and this idea of residue, and that we are basically our experiences, but also our parents, and the things that our parents bestow on us, and the relationships that we have with those parents. Because the relationships that children have with their parents are the most formative relationships that a child will have in their entire life. The most development that a child has is between the years of 0 to 3. The child's brain and those like early relationships and their ability to sort of form those bonds happen within the ages of 0 to 3. It affects their entire relationship with their parents, or with the whole society, from those early childhood developments. You've heard of early Head Start programs. That's what they're trying to sort of stave off any sort of antisocial behavior. That's why you should support your Head Start. So, your local Head Start. But so it gets really tricky to try to not talk about the fact that you have children when your work is directly related to this feminist concern of having children, and the relationships that we have to children as a society. So that gets a little bit tricky, and I've had to sort of fudge my artist statements a little bit to sort of try to gray them up, but I have a tendency to sort of I'm an overshare, and so sometimes that gets very difficult to try to play with the verbiage so that you're not directly implicating yourself. But especially, and this is something that I think when we were talking about how work has sort of propelled you creatively, this is one of the areas in which I feel a little bit, have felt a little bit stunted, was with when you're making very political work and very, I don't know how, feminist, but sort of agitprop, work that is very highly visible. Some of the durational performances that I've done have been, in particular the Shame Project, have implicated my children, have me being out on the street wearing a uniform that I've worn for an entire year without washing it. I have my children with me in tow at soccer games, at parent-teacher conferences, and those conversations become very challenging when you're trying to explain to a 3-year-old why you're still wearing the same clothes that you've been wearing for a year. So some of these things get to be kind of tricky. I often think about Sally Mann and the way that Sally Mann photographed her children, and there was a lot of to-do about the work that she was doing photographing her children, and the ways that she was taking advantage of her children or using her children in her work, and I'm very much guilty of the same thing. I draw work from my children, I collaborate with my children, and they are sort of participants in a lot of the work that I'm doing currently. So it gets a little bit tricky in that regard.
I know what you're saying, and being an arts activist and political in my work as well, that's something that I was always concerned about. And I found as the kids were growing, I mean, it's hard to explain it to a 3-year-old, but when they're living with it over time, they start to understand it. But there's another factor there, which is, you know, when your teenager says, you know, why can't you be like all the other mothers?
Why'd you mess me up?
You know, well, actually, my kids never said that, fortunately. But, you know, when you examine it, you know, I asked my son about that, and he said, well, why can't you make plain pancakes? You know, why do you have to make green shamrock pancakes? That's what he was talking about, not my parading down the street, you know, dressed however else. But the other factor there is their autonomy and their ability to have friendships. You know, it's one thing that my kids hung out at an art school and they knew all the new models and so on and so forth, but that's not the average kid's experience. And so when they come, you know, I ended up doing things like taking down new drawings in my house and things like that, mainly so that my kids had a fair shot with their friendships. Because it's not up to me to decide what some other parents think is important for their kids to know, you know, like, you know, nudity, for example. And that it didn't hurt me to do that. It wasn't like some kind of censorship. It was showing respect to my children so that if their friends and their parents' friends came over, I mean, I had some parents' friends that came over and were very suspicious of my husband and me as artists, and my husband drops down on the ground to his knees and said, did you think I'd be like Toulouse-Lautrec or what, you know? And very often, you know, people from school, parents and so forth, would look at you with suspicious
Take down
suspicion.
the breast paintings.
Yeah.
Point
yeah.
noted.
Yeah, point noted, because, you know, then you're infringing upon your children's social life, and they're not you, you know?
I think it's really interesting. I'm glad you brought up there is the internal mother guilt of am I harming my children, and then there is the external people who think you should feel guilty about involving your children. And I just wanted to give one more chance if anybody wanted to address that, the guilt that people think you should be having, and how you're altering your child's upbringing. If anybody wanted to respond to that before we move on. Last? Okay, fine. We have our last question. This will be the last one? Okay. All right, so I want to address the way that having a support network is incredibly crucial. It makes such a difference to the way that parenthood affects our work, and that's true whether or not we're artists. I wonder if there's a way that you see the possibility for a support structure in the art world, or even in the world of academia. Or is there something that you'd like to see artist mothers themselves doing to provide support for each other?
I just have a quick plug, Brenda. I can't help but say this because it really is coming from a place of need, I think, in the community. That my cohort, Brenda Baker and I, have set up an endowment for women visual artists in Dane County. And the idea is to help with the gender parity in the arts and overall, but also to give women the support that they need that currently is not really provided in the art world in Dane County. And so we're giving away 2 $10,000 grants starting in the fall. We're going to do this in perpetuity. And the thing about the grants is not to toot our own horn, but to let people know, to remind people that the application deadline is the 15th of July. But more than anything, these grants are unrestricted. Women can use them for childcare, or for rent, or for diapers, or for supplies, or for childcare, or whatever. And it's an important part to feel supported in your relationship, in your community, and so on and so forth. And we're hoping to give a leg up to a few more people and provide a little bit more possibilities for women visual artists in Dane County. So I just want to say that's what we're trying to do, and we think it's important, and we hope that it's a real boost for some women.
That's fabulous, just amazing. This is quick. I just want to give a plug for, and the New York Times covered this on this subject about 2 weeks ago, which is before I had children, when I got married, I said to my partner, it's 50-50, and I mean 50-50. And my husband did 50%, and I have the proof of it here, schedule by schedule by schedule. And I don't know that I'd have the career as an artist if I hadn't insisted on that. And the article in the New York Times made that point. It's across any career that a woman has.
Childcare needs to be affordable and socialized. Healthcare needs to be for women. They're, free healthcare for everyone. Those are some biggest obstacles: affordable healthcare, affordable childcare, affordable housing. Those are 3 obstacles that women have, especially women, and women artists included, but that's true across the board for women. Right. One of the most vulnerable populations, women and children. I have a really great idea. I'm not sure I can do it, but it's called the Parent Artist Center, PARC for short, and it's a time-sharing daycare situation. So you've got a place that's like all these studios, and in the center is the daycare center. And so you have timeshare. So as a parent artist, you can sort of timeshare. You can watch the artist kids for like maybe 2 hours, then you get that time back in studio time. So it's like a time-sharing concept. So that's my idea. Okay, you just gotta give me some credit for it, run with it, do it, take it on.
I think coming straight out of, I just graduated academia, or UW-Madison, and I think for me, one of the biggest concerns is just the only way that I was able to do it was because of my parents and my parents-in-law who are here, because they watch our kid. And I don't think it's financially reasonable for people who don't have that kind of support to go to graduate school and they have a kid who's not in school yet. So that's my biggest thing, is like make some free, fully funded scholarships for parents, including extras, especially if they're single parents.
My input on this is so lame compared to all of the issues you guys have brought up. I was just going to say that this summer I'll be trying a co-parenting, I guess you could think of it as a timeshare, for a residency, which is sort of all the things out there to do as an artist, is the one thing that I've suspended because it's just too challenging to make the residency happen without your kid. They're sort of too long with and without. So I'm trying for the first time this summer to go to Wasaic Project in upstate New York, where my buddy, who also has a daughter the same age as my daughter, get along swimmingly. We're just going to sort of trade off to hopefully both get studio time and some time usually with the girls. Yeah.
Residencies are tough.
Yeah.
There are some out there that are for parents, but they're
There are,
very few and
but
far
it's-
between and competitive.
Yeah, and it's, the 1 week workshops, I can still go teach those. Even the 2 week workshops, I've done that, brought my daughter, but I haven't done the full on residencies yet. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing how that model works.
Okay, and one of the things that we'll be doing is posting this video on YouTube, and when we do that, I would like to add a compilation of residencies and that are aimed at people with children, and also the continuation of this potential project.
Timeshare.
I think we should share a list of those things. I'll also be sharing a list of the artists who were in the slideshow in that same location. Once that video is up, I'll put it out. Thank you so much for sharing all of these intimate details.